Hello, everybody. This is Bruce again with another lesson on Stoner. I wanted to look at chapters 1 through 5. I know I talked a little bit about sort of the background and history last week, but didn't really dig into the book that very deeply. And so I wanted to cover a few things in about 20 minutes. So I'll keep my eye on the clock here, and just about the first 5 chapters, and then I will do another similar lesson tomorrow or the next day on chapters 5 through 10, which is what you're reading for this week. As I said last week, there's some history that's helpful to know about this book or the times that the book is set in, the early 20th century. And we touched on several of those in the last lesson, and I won't repeat them. But one thing I didn't touch on, and I'll just discuss it really briefly here, excuse me, spring allergies, is the odd history that the United States has, our culture has, with education. We have the oldest public education system in the world, free public education system in the world, that is. Britain had something similar to it, in the times leading up to the American Revolution, but nothing like our extensive public education system that we developed here. And of course, our founding fathers believed very strongly. They were all extremely well-educated people. And I use those words, founding fathers, not pejoratively against women, but really because all of those people at that time were men. You're thinking of people like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and Benjamin Franklin and George Washington and James Madison and John Adams and folks like that. They weren't intimately involved in setting up the public education system in the U.S. after the Revolution, after the Constitution was written. That was left to the states, as you undoubtedly know. But it was considered to be absolutely essential to being a democracy and being you have to have a wise electorate in order to run a country successfully. And I think if you just look back over the last 10 years, 20 years in the United States, we've seen a decline, not in public education. I'm not here to bash public education. I've been involved in it my entire life, almost. I'm almost 60 years old. I'll be 60 in September. And I've literally spent 55 of those 60 years in some way involved in public education, with the only exception of that being when I went to college. I went to a private university, or private college actually, that wasn't affiliated with public education. It was very expensive. I don't regret it, but it was very expensive. I was in a deep hole of debt when I graduated. And then I went to another private college for my master's degree, and I'm right now doing yet a third degree at yet another private college. So, being a kid who grew up in public education and then becoming a public school teacher for 20 some odd years before I began working at North Country, I've been deeply involved in public education, and it's to me, obviously, doing the job that I do and love. I consider it one of the greatest institutions that humanity has ever come up with. But that does not mean every American agrees with that, and there's a deep strain in America of being proud of ignorance, being proud of not being educated. There are all sorts of wonky words that that people have developed over the course of the last century, and I'm sure this is true in other cultures as well, of a deep distrust of the pointy-headed scholars and people living in their ivory towers and um, nerds and so on and so forth, and highly educated people are frankly looked down upon by some people in our country. We are the founders of the Know Nothing Party. That was an actual political party for a time, and basically their idea was the less we know, the better off we are, which is just to me utterly bizarre and completely crazy. But you see the strains of this in Stoner a little bit. His parents are not distrustful. After all, his father encouraged him to go. He saw the university as a means to improving the farm. And so for Mr. Stoner's, not William, but his father's and mother's perspective, the purpose of an education was to do a better job at your job, at your occupation. And as farmers, they wanted to update themselves. Their farm was poor, lacking in proper fertilization and so forth. We see that as the story develops more and more, that the farm just goes continually downhill. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that Stoner's father, even though he's a farmer by trade, knows very little about the science of farming. And so, again, Stoner was sent to the University of Missouri in Columbia to study agricultural science. And he makes that switch in his sophomore year to majoring in English. Another book that you can take a look at to see this strain of anti-intellectualism in the American psyche is, of course, Mark Twain's brilliant Huckleberry Finn and the character of Pap Finn. Huckleberry doesn't like going to school. He finds it constricting. He can't smoke. He can't do the things that he likes to do, like go fishing and hunting and all the other things a 14-year-old boy might prefer to going to school. But he doesn't badmouth it. But his father does. His father is bitter and hateful and bigoted and all terrible human qualities. And he voices in a speech early on in the book this drunken rant about the government and this and that. And it's not directly about education, but it certainly runs very close parallel to it. It's really his cousin, Mr. Foote, who sort of scorns William Stoner's choice to go to college. He seems to work William to the bone as a way of sort of making it almost impossible for him to achieve the education. He doesn't succeed in that, if that is his goal, but he certainly looks down on it. Like, what do you need to do that education thing for? Well, you're all college students. You certainly understand the value of a college education, even if it's simply to improve your opportunities at work or to get a career. If you're in a career path, if you're in nursing, if you're in rad tech, if you're in criminal justice, massage therapy, any of those programs, you can go on to four-year schools. You can go on and get graduate degrees in all of those things. But most people that are going to community college with in those tracks are intending after their 2 years to get a job in that field, obviously, and hats off to that ambition. We need great massage therapists and police officers and corrections officers and nurses and all the rest of it. But there is that tension in the book between being educated and pursuing a college path as Stoner does, all the way up to getting his PhD and then never leaving the University of Missouri. He looks for a different job elsewhere and is sort of relieved that nothing comes up. And so he stays under essentially the tutorship of his mentor, if you will, Archer Sloane, the first person that really got him interested in anything. And their relationship isn't, like a father and a son or anything like that. Sloane is fairly standoffish, and he never really takes Stoner under his wing in that utterly fatherly way that you might expect from a relationship like that. But it was the question that he badgered Stoner with over Shakespeare's 73rd sonnet. And you notice, if you read that section very carefully, you'll notice that he asks two other people before he asks Stoner. He doesn't return to those people, and he doesn't take the conversation any farther. But he badgers Stoner. He recognizes something in Stoner, is my reading of that he knows that this young man is reachable, and that he can hook him into the study of English, the study of literature, the study of philosophy, and then, of course, his career becomes teaching other people. And as the book progresses, it's not so much in the first 5 chapters because he hasn't really started his university teaching. He kind of, by chapter 3 or 4, he's beginning to teach. But it's really in the later chapters, 5 through 10 and then 11 through 17, where we get a sense of Stoner's teaching, which is not entirely successful. He's not viewed as a great classroom teacher. He's not a scholar in the traditional sense of publishing, dozens of books on esoteric things. He's very serious about his craft of teaching. He's very serious about his writing, although he only ever accomplishes the one book. At the end, we learn a little bit about, in the middle, we learn a little bit about his book. But his decision to stay is supported by his parents. They don't understand it. They think he's I don't want to say that. They don't know what to think because it's way outside of their framework that they've lived in their entire lives. But it's that falling in love with learning that happened to me, that happens to most people in my profession as an educator. At some point, something grabs you, and for me, it was also an English teacher. I was very happily majoring in political science, government, as it was called at the college I went to. But I always loved reading, and I always loved taking English courses, so I just kept taking, like an elective every semester or two in the English department, and I got absolutely hooked by a professor who was much more jovial and kind than Archer Sloane, whose very name should give you a clue of what he's like as a person, rather arch and kind of grumpy and not the sort of professor that you get warm fuzzies from, but a very wise and very smart man. And his questioning and his refusal to give the answer that he's looking for, and he just leaves the classroom when he's done badgering Stoner. But it's that moment that Stoner looks back on for the rest of his life as the moment that changed everything. In a future lesson, I'll actually take some time and talk about Shakespeare's Sonnet 73 because it's integral to the book, not only as the moment that the paper bag comes off Stoner's head and he becomes enthralled by education, by English literature, but the theme of the poem itself is very like a prediction of what happens to Stoner in his life. So that's chapter one. Chapter two shows, and it's all about World War One, with the exception of the first couple of pages, where for the first time in his life, Stoner actually develops a couple of friendships with contemporaries. He's a friendless child. He grows up lonely on his farm. He doesn't have any boyhood friends that he thinks about. We're not aware of any kind of relationship like that he enjoyed. No girlfriends, didn't date, nothing like that. So when he actually encounters these two men, Dave Masters and name is slipping my mind. Finch. They're kind of three of a perfect pair. Masters is the sort of typical scholarly cynic, and he Stoner is his equal intellectually, even though he doesn't think so. He is, and they're able to challenge each other. He challenges Stoner more than Stoner challenges him. But Masters is really kind of this figure in the background of the novel, always sort of there, as part of Stoner's psyche, much more so than Gordon Finch, who is a roly-poly party animal, if you will, a smart guy, but not on the same level as Stoner and Masters. And so when Masters is killed in World War One, it's a terrible tragedy for Stoner to lose a friend who is his equal, who he can talk on terms, the same terms with. Stoner makes the interesting decision not to go off to war with almost all the other young men of his generation. And then he thinks no more about it. He doesn't feel guilty about not going to war. He considers the war to be a waste of human effort and resources. It interferes with his path to getting his master's and then his PhD. And so he doesn't go. But that becomes something that people judge him on. And the same is, that's very true, that men who were capable but didn't serve in the Great Wars, World War One and Two, were looked down upon as somehow cowards and so forth. Stoner doesn't ever really take that to heart. And one thing about this novel is, although we see everything essentially over Stoner's shoulder, we rarely get inside his head. We don't know what he's thinking. It's a very clever choice on Williams's part to write this book this way, with this character that we don't know much about. What are his thoughts that are going through his head? We see what he does. We understand his emotions, but we rarely see him in a thinking mode. There are a couple of spots in the novel where he does. Chapter 3, the war is over and he meets Edith, and we'll talk much more about Edith with chapters 5 through 10. Suffice to say, she's beautiful. The description of her early on is this beautiful, lovely redhead with very light blue eyes, porcelain skin. She's sort of the all-American beauty in a lot of ways, but from the very beginning, we see that she is in some way fractured, and that there's something deeply wrong psychologically with Edith, and their marriage is a disaster by any way of measuring that. They are married within a couple of months of meeting. Marry in haste, repent at leisure is the old saying. For Stoner, he's head over heels in love with her, and she is not head over heels in love with him. She marries him out of a sense of, what else can I do? This is what I was born and bred to do, is to marry somebody. He's not a great choice for her. She's a banker's daughter. You would think that she would, seek somebody more in that socioeconomic bracket. Marrying a university professor who weren't paid well was a step down for her socially and economically. She has to work for the first time in her life at doing things like cleaning house and that sort of thing. She never takes a job, although she piddles around for a little time with a theater group. She's not employed by them. She's just essentially a volunteer. They have not the world's most disastrous honeymoon, but pretty darn close. And it's very clear from early on that Edith has a sexual, some kind of sexual hang-up, and we'll talk more about that as the story develops in the coming chapters. There are hints that she may have been molested by her father. As with many other things in the novel, Williams keeps that very close to the chest. He doesn't elaborate on that, but there's something about when the father dies, commits suicide later in the book, that seems to indicate that that's what Williams is thinking, and we'll look very closely at that passage. I'll pick up the next time with the passage that describes Edith and her life, and things that Stoner learns about her as they, getting married just a couple of months after meeting somebody. You don't know that much about them, and he is not aware of her sexual anxieties, and that's a really key feature in the book, because it disappears for a time and she becomes almost rabid over having sex, but it's only to produce a child. It's not an expression of love or closeness or anything like that. So we'll leave it there for today, and I will return soon with yet another installment of Stoner, one of my favorite books. All right, talk soon. Oh, and I will be posting the writing piece for this novel very soon, probably tomorrow, which would be Thursday. This is Wednesday afternoon that I'm recording this. So I will talk soon with you, and I will post that writing assignment very soon. It will be after. It's really based on chapters 5 through 10 with the character Tobe, as he's called, Tobe, the hired hand on the farm. So with that, I will see you later.